Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Carl Brook, and I have the honor to serve as the Executive Director of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. And we will take a slow start as people are still joining. Yeah. Okay, I might go ahead and start. Um, on behalf of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, I would like to welcome you to this webinar. It's an incredibly timely topic. We're going to be exploring conflict mitigation in transboundary watersheds and catchments. The key idea is to posit catchments as the fundamental unit for integrated climate adaptation planning and the challenges faced in the case of shared administration of river basins, whether international or intranational. And this is an incredibly timely topic. Over the last 30 plus years, we have seen the environment be a place for countries to come together, to cooperate, to build institutions and laws and trust. And water has been a particularly important context for that. And in fact, when Ken Konka and Jeff DeBalco 20 plus years ago, almost 25 years ago, thought to bring people together to provide an alternate vision to the environment as a cause of conflict narrative that was dominant in the field of environmental security. It turned out that all of the chapters in environmental peacemaking were related to water. And Ashok was among the authors in that, if I'm not mistaken. We are in a unique time right now. 2025 was a point of inflection. There were a lot of threads that we have seen predating 2025, with countries pulling away from international institutions and rule of law, rising nationalism, rising resistance to migration. 2025 really put all of that into a different space. And I believe that we have entered into a new geopolitical era. And this is a generational issue. 20, 30, 40 years, we're going to be seeing this. There are some who think that the whole neoliberal order is dead. I don't think so. I think it's changed. I think it has changed in some dramatic ways. We're still trying to understand it. But I don't think that we're going to toss out all of the international environmental treaties or international water treaties or international institutions, but they're changing. And so this is an incredibly timely opportunity to discuss, where do we see transboundary cooperation going? And before I hand it over to our chair and the panel, I'd like to just kind of note that this event is taking place in the context of the 4th International Conference on Environmental Peacebuilding, which will be held in Ottawa, June 16 to 19. And I'll put the link in the chat for those who are interested. Thank you. As part of the conference and the lead up to the conference, we are hosting a series of events, online, in person, and hybrid. This is the path to Ottawa. And the idea is to engage as many people as possible, as many perspectives as possible, in helping to identify the themes that that are important in helping to bring more voices, whether people are going to be in Ottawa or not. I think it's especially important for those who will not be in Ottawa. I would like to particularly acknowledge Ramanaj Mitra for catalyzing this event, and also to Annika Erickson Pearson for supporting this. And finally, I'd like to note that all of this is being coordinated by the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, which is a professional association of over 450 people in 85 countries who are interested in environment, conflict, and peace, both from a research side, from a practice side, and from a policy side. And with that, I'd like to introduce Ashok Swain. Ashok is a professor and head of department of the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University. He is the UNESCO Chair on International Water Cooperation and the Director of Research School of International Water Cooperation at Uppsala University. He is also the founding editor-in-chief of Environment and Security, the only peer-reviewed journal on the topic, which is published jointly by the Environmental Peacebuilding Association and Sage Publishing. Ashok received his PhD from the sorry, I'm getting an echo there. Sorry. Ashok received his PhD from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi in 1991, and since then he's been teaching at Uppsala University. He's been a MacArthur Visiting Fellow at the University of Chicago, Visiting Professor/Fellow at the UN Research Institute for Social Development in Geneva. Ashok, I hand the proceedings over to you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for kind introduction. It's now my pleasure to welcome all our viewers and also experts on this panel. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers who will be sharing their experiences and perspectives on conflict mitigation and climate adaptation with the watershed of catchment, which are their planning and coordination initiatives. Though we have been, this is as Carl was mentioning, we are in a very, very interesting period of the time. And the kind of, I will try to put it in a perspective how the transboundary water work, which has been at least during my time in the last 35 years, it has evolved quite a lot. Carl was mentioning environmental peace building that started in the late 90s, environmental peacemaking, and that time we moved from how water and rivers can create conflict to peacemaking. That brought a new area of research and investigation altogether. But I think also the number of rivers have changed. I mean, when we started doing work on the international rivers, there are around 230 to 40 rivers as per the UN registers. But now there are 310 plus. This because of the science, because of the politics, because of the geography. But that's not the issue here. The issue is that there has been new areas of not only how we look at the transboundary water, how we are cooperating, what are the institutions are there, what are the legal framework have been built, what are the hopes, how it is going up. Because in the 1990s, when we started looking at it as a security perspective of the international water sharing, that is the time it started with all this Cold War era politics, how this was going on, this lawmaking on the international water, how the UN General Assembly were divided on the basis of that. But then we started, we heard an UN convention in international non-navigational uses of water resource. That was in 97, I think was approved in the UN General Assembly. It was, of course, recently got required a number of signatures. But then there was also whether we will use the water as a conflict or the water will be used as a conflict or in the war. The rivers, dams will be attacked in the. So that's the norms were created in the 90s to last, but then that has changed quite dramatically as well. Then the climate change. the climate change has brought in the kind of question mark which we thought that probably we will not see this when we started doing in the peacemaking research in the 1990s to 2000. Because we saw that, of course, many of these, or not a single war can be directly attributed to water sharing issues or immediately because the water sharing has led to the war. But I think it is also important to see that those kind of water sharing issues have become much more complex now because of the climate change, because of the population growth, and more than that, because more than climate change, population growth, but also we see that the power dynamics have changed in the different basins. Uh, we uh, we have started talking about now, the World Bank used to take much of pride of what it has done in the Indus River. Of course, Indus Water was agreement was 1960. After that, India, Pakistan fought for 3 to 4 wars, but nobody talked that time not to, about the Indus Water Treaty. It was going on when both the countries were fighting the war. But now, this is India claims that it is kept in abeyance. The Egypt, Sudan, Egypt, Ethiopia, now a big dam. I mean, it has been always, Egypt has been considering the Nile River as its own. But now, or particularly sharing a part of it to Sudan. Ethiopia was not a party to it in any sharing, but Ethiopia has now a largest hydropower dam in Africa built on Nile. So I think things have become quite different now. That's why I say it's not only climate change, the power politics has changed. But you are not here to listen to me and my way of looking at it. You are here to listen to others, the speakers, which we have a fantastic lineup here. Let's start with. We have here with us Mara Pigneno. Mara is a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Law and the Global Studies Institute at the University of Geneva. Um, she is Vice Director of the Platform of International Water Law and Scientific Director of the Geneva Water Hub, which is doing fantastic research on the transboundary water issues for some time now. Mara acts as an expert and legal advisor of states and international organizations. In 2017, she was awarded the Women Peace Builder for the Water Prize by the Foundation Milano per Expo. I'm sorry, my Italian is not that good, not my Swedish either, for her research in international water law. Then we have Dr. Hugh Merritt, is an environmental scientist and civil engineer whose work bridges applied research and regulatory policy to strengthen drinking water source protection and catchment resilience. He's an assistant professor, industry university R&D in the College of Engineering at National Yunlin University of Science and Technology, Taiwan, and has held senior technical policy roles with the Victorian Department of Health, the National Health and Medical Research Council, and the Water Corporation of Western Australia. Rosario Sanchez. Dr. Sanchez is a water management professional who specializes in building successful links between policy and science, and the associate graduate faculty in the Water Management and Hydrological Sciences program at Texas A&M University. She is the founder and director of the Permanent Forum of Binational Waters and co-chair of the Transboundary Aquifers Commission from IAH. She has 20 years of experience in effective international governmental negotiation, decision-making processes, strategic planning, and research in water management and climate change. She has deep expertise on the US-Mexico water sharing treaties and science policy development. Finally, Anders Egerskog. Dr. Egerskog is the program manager of the Cooperation in International Waters in Africa, CIWA Trust Fund, and Transboundary Waters focal point at the World Bank. Prior to joining the World Bank, he was counselor at the Swedish Embassy in Amman with responsibility for the Swedish support to regional water resources in the MENA region. He has also held the position as director at Stockholm International Water Institute, SIWI. At SIWI, he headed the Transboundary Unit and applied research work at of CV, and I was project manager for the UNDP Shared Water Partnership. I have worked with Indus probably for the nearly 25 to 30 years. I don't, every 5 years he's in a different place, so I don't know where he is or anytime. Anyway, so this is a fantastic lineup. You will never get a lineup to talk about the transboundary water management, transboundary work, legal institutional framework, how it is developing, how the future looks like. So I will go one by one of you to discuss few questions. Feel free to answer them. I think, of course, as you know, these are all being recorded. So you do it at your own risk, but that's absolutely fine. You can say anything, but you will be responsible for what you say. My first question is to Anders. You have spent many years working on the transboundary water issues in various capacities. Can you speak about your current role at in Paris and also the importance of transboundary water resources for the sustainable development of the African continent?
Okay, thank you very much, Ashok, for the introduction, and indeed, I think Ashok is completely correct. This is a well, maybe apart from myself, but it's a great lineup of speakers. The topic is very timely. I agree with the introductory words of both Carl and Ashok. We're in an era of lots of change at the global level with repercussions on transboundary water management as well. So, as Ashok mentioned, I lead and manage a program called SIVA. I'll pop the website for the program in the chat in a bit, so you can check for yourself. But that is a trust fund focused on supporting countries managing and developing the transboundary water resources, so whether it's surface or ground. It's a trust fund that's been around for about 50 years. It was just extended last year for another 5 years to 2031. We have raised about $180 million so far, but we're counting. We're hoping to get that up to 300. Most of it obviously has been spent already supporting river basin organization, regional economic communities, aquifer basin organizations, and the likes in managing, developing their shared resources. So that's sort of the context of where I'm at. And I think, as you know, I want to highlight a few things here. I mean, I agree fully with the assessment of and the pressures that are increasing. Climate change being a major one that sort of alters the equations. I mean, if you're in a country, you may get the same amount of water, slightly less, slightly more, but it's increasingly erratic in most places. You get heavy downpours, then you will have long periods with no rain, and it's very hard to plan. And if you are to plan, you need to do that if you're sharing a resource. Most of the water in Africa, up to 75%, a little bit depends on how you count, is shared between countries, whether ground or surface. But if you're supposed to manage your national challenges, it's almost impossible to think about doing that without having some basic cooperation and hopefully more than that with your neighbors. And that gets, in some parts of Africa, it's less, it's always complicated. It's somewhat less complicated in some parts of Africa, also depending on the political situation, but also on the number of countries that are sharing the resource, whether it's ground or surface. I think what we are seeing from the World Bank perspective, and our role is, we're fully integrated. We're a World Bank Trust Fund, and our main mandate is to support poverty reduction and development, basically. For you that follow the World Bank, sort of overall discussions, I mean, we have turned our focus a lot on jobs in the recent years, and how can we, as a means to development, develop and support more job growth, recognizing that not least in Africa, the major challenge from a development perspective, at least as seen by many, is the job challenge. How do we create the number of jobs that are needed to sustain the future generation? And here you also need, you need water at the national level, and you also need to cooperate around that water. I think what we are seeing, and we're doing some analytical work to try to understand that situation better at the continental level, taking into account aspects relating to energy, to agriculture, which are all craving the water that is, in most cases, either fully or in the largest part shared. How can that be done with both the current frameworks for cooperation, agreements that are in place? What else is needed in terms of perhaps agreements or cooperative framework that may be relating to a river, a lake, an aquifer? But in addition to that, it doesn't actually stop there, and I think this is a new sort of frontier that we're exploring. But I think we need more science, more research there as well. Is what we call the atmospheric water, the green water. So some call it the green water. Well, the green water is really the topsoil layer, but the atmospheric water. What happens, for example, if you think about a scenario in the Congo forest where you chop down trees? What happens then to the evaporation, and what does that mean for other basins and regions of Africa and even beyond? And how can transboundary institutions, regional economic communities deal with those types of challenges? Because at the end of the day, those needs to be dealt with in a concerted fashion. And now we're actually expanding from the basin, from the lake basin, or from the shed water groundwater management systems to something that actually goes beyond. Are we set up from a legal perspective, from a political perspective, to deal with those challenges that emanate? And do we have the policies? It's one thing to have the policies, but do we have the implementation capacity to actually protect the water towers? Whether that's forest or shared ecosystems that needs to be protected for the water to be able to evaporate and maybe rain down within a basin or even outside a basin. Those are some of the questions that we are starting to grapple with. That said, I'll soon, Ashok, get to the finishing line here. I realize I'm talking probably too much. I get excited. But we are, in terms of what we also do, we are supporting river basin organization across Africa. We are supporting the Zambezi River. We're supporting in the Nile, which we've done for many, many years. We are supporting in the Senegal. We're supporting several groundwater management initiatives in Southern Africa, in Western Africa, in Central Africa as well. I'll end with one exciting thing that I think is a bit innovative and new, and that is happening in the Okavango right now. We, as the World Bank through Global Environment Facility funds, in parallel with the EU and in parallel with the UNDP, are supporting the operationalization of something called the CORB Fund, the Okavango River Basin Fund. And you may have heard about the RBO, the River Basin Organization, or OCACOM, who is a traditional, well-functioning river basin organization. But they have also put in place, recognizing they need more funding and financing coming into this space. And they also need to think about the sustainability, not to be dependent on actors like the World Bank, like other development partners. And they've established a fund, and we are quite excited about looking into innovative financial mechanisms to make it more sustainable. The idea in short, it's a little more complex, but the gist of the idea is to put in place an endowment fund. So an endowment fund is actually money that is being put into a fund and that is not touched, or it's touched. You put the money in the international market, it generates funds, and the idea is that the revenues coming from that will actually, we'll see if this works, but this is the idea, will start generate funds to make the cooperation and the project development sustainable, because they can live off of these funds that are generated, not to make it wholly dependent on donors that come with their agenda. So it's a question of ownership as well. It'll be owned even more so by the countries. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing. There's interest for these types of setups in other river basin organizations as well, to see how they can develop this further. Ashok, I could talk a lot more, but I think I'll stop here. I think there's a second round as well. And happy to take questions on this and on other things. Finally, before I hand back, I do want to recognize that there are 7 development partners, committed ones, that are over a period of close now to 15 years have been supported, and that's Netherlands, Sweden, EU, Norway, Denmark, UK, and Austria. Back to you, Ashok.
Thank you, Anders. You are doing quite hugely important work, in particular in Africa, where the transboundary rivers and the development of infrastructures have been quite not up to the mark like in other parts of the world, even compared to the other parts of the global south. So I think this is a very, very important work you are doing there. But because of the time, I will not ask an additional question, but remember to come back and reflect on in your next question, next round, that because there are other actors are also there, and many powerful actors, very different funding pattern. So how your actions and the way you are supporting the different infrastructures development in these basins, and also cooperative mechanism, does it go in tandem with the other actors and their financing and their cooperation mechanism? Thank you. And now next I will go to Rosario. You have been closely involved with the research and advocacy in the Colorado River Basin. That's overall the U.S.-Mexico shared basin. This is something also important because when in the research originally it's a river basin which connected a global north to global south those days, and of course this is also a kind of how the the last agreement under President Nixon took place. That was also a very different way of how to manage the transboundary river basins. So in this context, I think what are some of the complexities that you dealt with the U.S.-Mexico border, and what are the approaches that you think have worked in promoting cooperation or not cooperation? Rosario, it's up to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashok. Can you all see my screen? Yes?
Yes, we do.
I just prepared it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, good night, whatever you are. Thank you for the invitation to the Environmental Peacebuilding Association for being here. Very excited to share some thoughts. Of course, we're not going to solve it. This goes beyond us. And I agree that we are on a threshold before and after 2025. Especially between Mexico and the US in terms of water sharing treaties, at least. So I want to start by just, there are a lot of topics that we can talk about. I mean, we don't want to talk about specifics on treaties because we need to be careful with what we said. We agree on that and responsible for what we said. But there's something at least across, and I know this is true in most of other regions of the world that share waters, is that there's something scarcer than water itself. And I believe Anders already mentioned briefly what is it? Is this moving? Not moving. Okay. So there's trust. So we might and we are facing changes in the geopolitical arena. We are seeing new orders around the world, around countries, around priorities, around the way we see and address international issues, being environment and water, one of the most important one. However, the principles still the same. So the basics on how we do things remain the same. We still need trust in order to build whatever we want to build across borders. And that's getting a little bit scarcer and a little bit more scarcer than water. So there's I guess a new theme that it's being developed these days, which is the science diplomacy, and how the science fits into the ground of diplomacy or effective communication across countries. And that sets in the overall need of interdisciplinarity. It's not just about science anymore. It's not just about engineering anymore. We need much more than that. We need much more than science, actually, these days, to overcome the size and the magnitude of the challenges that we have, because they are not environmental, climatic, or water only. Of course, we have those, and those are, getting into a threshold level, but we have others too that are basic in order to address the former ones. So we have to develop more interdisciplinarity profiles and also, not just hard sciences, but also soft skills. And those are poorly taught, at least at a graduate level these days. We have seen that. Now, between Mexico and the US, and this is just Mexico and the US, but it resembles what has been mentioned already. We have issues of population growth. It's not going to be stopped. We have one of the largest economy of the world. The fourth or the fifth economy of the world, the US-Mexico border region can be considered that, depends on the year. How much water is going to be demanded in the next 50 years is expected to duplicate by 100% in municipal use and 40% in industry use. We know that climate is not going to be, behaving in this part of the world. The US-Mexico border region is considered one of the most vulnerable to climate. We are expecting variable or erratic patterns of precipitation, snowmelt on both of the largest river basins in the border. And at the same time, we know that those basins are overallocated, which means we have more water on paper than we actually have on the basins to allocate that. When we talk about what are the problems, well, the way I see it, I don't see actually the climate being the worst crisis that we are facing. I think the crisis goes more into accessibility of fresh water and food, which is impacted by supply chains that we haven't looked at those more carefully, at least in this part of the world. And that sets a lot of pressure on groundwater, especially on transboundary aquifers, not just between US and Mexico. We have seen this, and we are seeing this all over the world. Most of our important reserves are groundwater these days, especially under current climate projections. And as I have said before, science is not enough. So I just want to briefly mention what it's out there considered to be science diplomacy. It's a fast-growing field, of course, given the needs that we have today. It's a combination of formal and informal, interactions, not just between countries at a formal level, and that happens a lot between Mexico and the US, in particularly the Colorado River, which is an example for that. There's a lot of things going on the ground that are not, that are not regulated or monitored or attended by the formal channels or the federal governments. And some of those efforts get to a certain level of maturity that become interesting to be attended at a formal scale or a binational scale. And the Colorado River is one of those. I mean, these days between US and Mexico, everything that has to do with water now has a scale to a federal level. It wasn't like that years before, but now that it's escalated into a formal level, which means presidents talking about water issues, then a lot of the efforts that were going on at a very local scale tend to be impacted by those, the binational agenda itself, and contaminated by that as well, which doesn't help much, but still the need remains. So, and I just mentioned this, environmental challenges go beyond borders more. That is growing. It's not going to get any better in the future. So we need much more development of these type of profiles and assessments at a very, very regional, but on a local scale, more than national scales and binational formal channels. So the experience of the Colorado River, not the experience of the Rio Grande River, by the way, they're very, very extremely different, and the history is different. But water is there, and water is a noble resource, and it's inevitably shared, even domestically. So the needs, when we negotiate water issues, it's either a win-win or a lose-lose game. So that helps. That really, really puts the leverage on the negotiation table, because regardless of power asymmetries, water still serves as a leverage, because no party is willing to risk their own benefit. Now, what happens in the negotiation process is up to the countries and up to the negotiators to agree on something, but water brings people to the table at the beginning. And then it's up to the countries to see how they can leverage that power of being either upstream or, the disadvantage of being downstream as well. So now more than ever, diplomats have to understand science, but also scientists, as myself and others, we need to learn to communicate more effectively. Because that policy science, that a gap, there's always there. And the academia usually blames policymakers for not listening or making the right decisions. But I think it's a little bit more than that. I think there's a lack of knowledge or investment on how we communicate science more effectively, how we translate science, and not just to decision makers, but all the sectors of the society, to the lay audiences. What do we need to communicate to the stakeholders that we need to have included on the negotiation process? So if we mention what's the recipe to do that, well, there's really no recipe to do that. There's no straightforward answers. It's a method. It's a process. We don't have protocols. There are no methods. We live in very uncertain times. Every day is a new day. It's a new way of doing things. But there's still processes. There are time scales that we need to be aware of, and there are scopes where these things take place. But most of all, there are principles, and those principles are the ones that I mentioned from the beginning, remain valid. Even though it's more challenging, they do remain valid, because we're still human beings, right? And those institutions are dealt with human beings, so we have to go to basics. And the principles that I just want to mention quickly before we go to them, I don't want to take more time because I want to hear from others. But every decision that we make at any level and at any scale have an impact. We need to share our dimension on how our decisions are actually impacting, not just at a national state, but also at international or transboundary state. The commitment, the respect for those agreements. It's hard, it's getting harder, but still the commitment, it's the only way. to have benefit for all riparians. The trust, which is the way I started my intervention, has been really undervalued, but it's still the strongest link, and it will remain the strongest link to be successful at transboundary scale. But it's also, as we have seen it, and we have seen it between Mexico and the US over the years, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, it is the most vulnerable link to break. It's not recyclable, it's hardly amended, and if you lose it, it's gone. So, and this is true for not just countries, this is true for all types of relationships. The inclusion, water is a natural suppressor of differences. I have mentioned this. It helps leverage power asymmetries, but also helps include all the stakeholders. And we need to include stakeholders in the decision-making process. And I mentioned this, the communication, not just to communicate what we want to do, what our priorities are and what we need, but also the feedback of that message to others. And that's getting harder and harder, especially these days with all social media and mass communication and miscommunication and information technologies and AI. We don't know if what we see is true anymore. So, and I don't know if you saw last week, the World Economic Forum published the 2026 the most important threats for the world. And number 4 was miscommunication and misinformation. I mean, the other 3 were related to, of course, water and natural disasters, but the 4th was misinformation. So this is getting complicated. But still, the basics of transboundary negotiations and on water in particular remain valid. That's what my intervention for that.
Thank you, Rosario, bringing the kind of issues which we all know but tend to forget. And these are the significantly important to remind us that what exactly needed, why we don't really do it while we are advocating certain kind of framework of development or some institutions building or some kind of river basin organizations. At the same time, I think we also need to understand the diplomats, why particularly those who are dealing with the water issues, how they do not understand the water as such, because that's why they are particularly diplomacy on water needs to have that science background or some kind of understanding of science. But that pushes the issue from the diplomatic agenda because of lack of understanding, and it finally ends up becoming a larger issue. But thank you for bringing it up. My next question is to Mara. What role do institution and institutional law play in preventing and resolving disputes around transboundary water? Given the impacts of climate change, can you give some examples where river basin organizations have created a positive change or have not been able to address it? Thank you.
Thank you. Many thanks for inviting me to join this conversation. So I would like to address the role of international law and legal frameworks and what is the added value basically of international law, especially in these challenging times. So basically, international law provides principles to know what also Rosario mentioned. So what are these principles that in international law we talk often about general principles of international law. One of the sources of international law, together with treaties and international customs. So general principles are those that are reflected in domestic law and then come also at the international level. So we see, for example, the 2 cardinal principles of international water law that are the principle of equitable and unreasonable utilization and the obligation not to cause significant harm are basically principles that have their roots in domestic law, especially in federal states like Switzerland, Germany, and the US. And then, so from domestic law, these principles were reflected also in the UN Global Water Conventions and basin treaties. And these principles are not only based on treaties, but are also part of customary norms. So what does it mean, customary norm? It means that it is a norm part of international practice that we can see in different treaties, and also in the what we call opinio juris. So what is the opinio juris? It is the willingness of states to commit to some rules. Ascot mentioned the UN Watercourses Convention that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1997 and entered into force only in 2014. So you can see how much time it took for this convention to enter into force. And this shows basically that states are still reluctant to accept some limitation on their sovereignty. So together with the UN Watercourses Convention, we have also the UN Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes that has its secretariat in Geneva, and a meeting of the parties. And this convention has its origin as a regional agreement, but since 2016 also become a universal agreement that today has more than 50 countries parties to this convention. International water law, we have this global water convention, we have regional agreements, we have basin agreements, and there is always a close connection between these three different scales of cooperation between states. It's another element that I would like to highlight that is also a basic of international law reflected in the UN Charter. It is there is a duty to resolve disputes through peaceful means, including in the case of water conflicts. And we see there are two main methods that are diplomatic means to solve water conflicts. So, for example, negotiation, mediation, third office, and judicial means. So, for example, to bring disputes to the International Court of Justice or the arbitration tribunals. And one of the cases that also was mentioned at the beginning, the Indus Treaty, it is interesting that in the case of India and Pakistan, disputes have been brought to arbitration tribunals. So even when the relationship between countries are difficult, there is still this faith not to bring a dispute to an international judicial body. So here, I would like to give you two examples. I mean, I could have choose other example, but I think I wanted to choose two examples quite old, because we can see that really there is a continuity in some of the basics of international law when it applies to transboundary water resources. So I wanted to choose to mention the statute on the Uruguay River between Argentina and Uruguay of 1975. And what it is interesting in this agreement, it is that the two parties established a binational water commission, and they included in the agreement the fact that in the case of a dispute on the interpretation or the application of the statute on the Uruguay River, the dispute could be brought to the International Court of Justice. And this was the case in the 2000, where in 2006 a case was brought to the International Court of Justice regarding the construction of pulp mills on the Uruguay River. The other case, also an old example between US and Canada regarding the boundary waters between the two countries. It is very interesting, the powers that are given to the joint body, the International Joint Commission. Especially, I wanted to highlight the third point, where this body approves dams, obstruction, modification in water levels flowing from boundary waters. So really, the two countries have given important powers to this this binational body, and we have other example like in the statute on the Uruguay River, but not many river basin organizations have given this role to international body. Finally, regarding climate change, so I wanted to mention the case of the Senegal River Basin Organization. That is really one of the good practice that we have in management of a shared water resource. Why? No, I didn't include in the slide, but one of the most important example of this organization, it is that the dams that are built on the Senegal River are a joint ownership of the four countries that share the river. This is really a peculiarity of this legal institutional framework. So what is the link with climate change? No, as I indicated, so this organization was created in the context of the climate variability of the 70s. So you see, it is not so new what we are facing today regarding the climate change. Already in the 70s, there was this issue. And then one of the most important topics that must be addressed together, it is the extreme weather events like floods and droughts. And here, the riparian countries have established early warning mechanisms that are jointly managed. We have regular sharing of data to anticipate the negative impacts linked to the extreme weather events. And also, here I wanted to link with the intervention of Anders. We have a very interesting investment plan on climate at the transboundary level that rely also on state investment plans with a long-term vision to 2050. So I think that here we can see really the vision of these states. So some of these elements are also present in other organizations, but I think that the ONBS, it is really an example that can be followed for other river basin organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mara. This is excellent, particularly bringing the Senegal River Basin Organization as an example. I think we all know that the Senegal River Basin Organization is something with the special characteristics where science and the experts play the major role, how to decide when there is a situation of crisis compared to the politicians in other river basins in the global south. And I think it's the whether science or the politics that matters in the river basin organizations do need to based on the fact and the science and need to be managed with the help of the science rather than the politics. And that's why we see the differences of ways how the things are happening now, particularly when the climate crisis brings very uncharacteristic challenges which we were not able to before facing. Thank you. Now it's Houston, through your experience in policy and governance of watershed, can you tell us what are the key elements that must be taken into account to deliver livelihoods and public health outcomes? These two aspects are heavily affected due to climate change and the worsening global security environment.
Yes. Thank you for the question. I'm having a few computer issues, so forgive me if it goes a bit glitchy. But yeah, one of the things I sort of wanted to touch off with is a few sort of key numbers that come up when you think about international governance and watersheds. And, you know, we have nearly half the world is situated in one of the close to 300 transboundary river basins, which is around 40% of the world's population. So it's something that we experience on a daily life. And these transboundary basins hold around 60% of global fresh water. And without suitable adaptation planning, climate change could drive this conflict up to 40% of those basins by 2050. Now, thinking about it from a sustainable catchment perspective, we talk a bit about the policy space, and one of the biggest challenges is policy is very multi-dimension, and often it's written in the single dimension for one purpose, for a specific thing. So what I wanted to touch on was the quantity versus quality debate. And this is something that's come up particularly in the public health space and in the livelihood space. So it's one thing to have water, it's another thing to have water that is fit for purpose. And so discussing the value of quantity versus quality in decision making for transboundary catchment management and in response to water resources impacts we see through climate change, we've seen a shift in sort of thinking around this space where there was the thinking, well, let's have water, we need to have water, everyone needs water for sanitation, for agriculture, for disposal of waste, through sewage systems and things like that. But now we talk about needing water when we need water. So having water at the right time for irrigation, having water during the warm seasons when there is a higher demand for sanitation, for drinking water and things like that. And now we're sort of seeing that shift towards fit for purpose. Is the water of a suitable quality to do what I need it to do for either my public health outcomes or for my irrigation requirements? And a good example of this is where we're seeing along the lower Mekong River, where we're starting to see saltwater intrusion, where it's getting harder to grow rice and other agricultural products. While there is water there, it's water that is not usable in the sense that it maximizes production and gives the communities everything they're looking for. So to put some clarity around the discussion for now, we'll focus a bit on the public health. That's my area of passion and what I've done a lot of policy advising around for government in the past. Now we look at the water produced by a catchment, and I think this was touched on a few by Anders and both by Rosaria, where by the time you receive the water, it's gone through a number of processes, a number of boundaries, a number of influences, and not all of those you can manage at the point of abstraction. So you're in this really challenging space about being stuck with the water that you're being delivered and how to manage that going through. And so what we see, going back to the case of the Mekong, not having the right water for purpose is as good as having no water at all. So, we get into that challenge where you see water quality, becoming water scarcity. So when we see these changing weather patterns internationally, we see, we take, for example, across my country, Australia, we're seeing a lot of drying and, there's a lot of environmental issues, irrigation issues, drinking water issues. So one of the things is, well, why don't we treat wastewater and use wastewater as an environmental water? And so that's one way of dealing with that. But the issue you run into with that is that, well, there's no use of recycled water. So you're indirectly introducing potable reuse where there's not a suitable policy for that in place. And so also with that climate change and in the public health aspect, you're talking about water treatment plants. Now, water treatment plants are fantastic bits of equipment that can take most any type of water and turn it into suitable drinking water. But these water treatment plants don't do well with change in water. And so they need a consistent quality of water to be able to produce the water that you want to get out of them. So with climate change and shifting water patterns, we start seeing infrastructure that is no longer in that fit for purpose space. Now, and it's also easy to overwhelm water treatment and things like that. So this is where policy has a really important role. And I know a lot of us today will keep on speaking about policy because it is one of the key attributes that really shift the way water resources are managed. And there's also the science element within that policy as well. You know, looking at examples in South Asia where they've done reviews of the research in place for policy development, and they find only 12% of the research actually translates into some sort of policy, where a lot of the research is, you know, usable in the policy space, but is not actually able to be readily translated. So this is where, you know, like a lot of the research we do in our area is around actually taking this evidence base from this research and turning that into policy through evidence to decision processes. So policies can solve one issue with the scarcity of water and create another as well. Now, we look at, you know, examples of, we look at the functional breakdown of transboundary catchments, or any catchment for that matter, is that we see the water is used for drinking water, disposal of sewage, it's used for irrigation, for fishing, for all these different purposes. So it becomes this multi-dimensional problem, which is not actually really tackled together in policy. Now, when we talk about quantity, now we see some examples in transboundary catchments, particularly in South Asia and Africa, where there is actually not so much a scarcity of water, but a scarcity of the right quality of water. Now, we look at, for example, the US now, and the Great Lakes and the boundary with Canada. And we've seen that rapid shift in American policy away from regulation and things like that, which, while it's done on the domestic side, it does have that transboundary effect where you're getting reduced, excuse me, so you're getting that reduced monitoring, that reduced management, which has effects on both sides. So I guess what I'm trying to get here is that when we look at the policy, it's really important to understand policy as a multi-dimensional problem and the linkage between policy and the science. And I think moving forward and solving some of these issues and actually getting to the problem and looking at delivering water in the right quantity, at the right time, at the right quality for its end users really requires getting in there and as Rosario was talking about, that trust element, engaging with stakeholders and getting to that point where the stakeholders can see that there's that thought and that process and that policy that sits behind it. It's all based in science and fact. So going back to the question, you know, the heavily affected climate change and livelihoods and public health. Now, even in somewhere like Australia, where is a very large country, we have the Murray-Darling Basin, and we've seen, you know, the Murray-Darling Basin travels through a number of states. And so even with the, you know, in a country like Australia where you have very strong regulation, you have a lot of state policy, there's still a lot of disagreement between the states along that boundary, and still that difficulty in establishing that one federal policy and approach to management. So I don't think there's any easy questions that, there's lots of easy questions, but there's no easy answers in achieving this. So what I wanted to leave this conversation with is a bit around, when we talk about water quality, water quantity and scarcity and water resources, is not to neglect that water quality issue and its usability and its fit for purpose, and the role that water has in public health through sanitation and through helping to dispose of, you know, providing dilution and catchment, has a very important role in attenuation of microbes, and they're very complicated bits of equipment, which I guess, you know, require really that science-based policy and management. And I hope I got my point across very quickly there, but I think, yeah, it's an excellent question, and I think don't forget the quantity versus quality debate when developing policy and thinking about these problems.
Thank you, Ew. I think this is an important aspect we kept forgetting, that the quantity and quality, and we always think that the global south, particularly Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, is a quantity issue where the transboundary river basins do fight, whereas in the quality issue, which has been an issue in Colorado, in the Nile, in the Rhine, and also in Africa, in Australia, Murray-Darling basins and others. But I think these are connected also. Quantity, low quantity of the water also will be seriously affecting the quality of the water, but also in the global south, because of various, new development, particularly after the pandemic, the global health issue becoming also the public health issue becoming more and more prominent in the public policy making and public discourse. And I think the quality of the water is also becoming more of an issue in the global south, or particularly in the region which is the quantity used to dominate. So I think this is for us, those who are engaged in the transboundary water management, we must realize there is how the issues interact, and also looked at it differently. And if the policy making doesn't take into considerations the complexities associated with the quantity and quality, we will end up in a sometime soon that none of this policy will work in the long run. Thank you. Then I think I will move to the second round of questions, and I would suggest speakers to limit a little bit. Then we can at least we can leave it for the audience to ask questions, or at least keep more time for general discussions. I will begin the next round of questions with Mara. How do you think we can make international river basin treaties and freshwater agreements more resilient to climate change? As you know, the climate change has brought in number of challenges, particularly in the supply, not only in the supply and demand of water, but also how the variation taking place in the river flow.
Yes, thank you for the question. It is not an easy one, especially because in international law we have on one end the need to ensure the stability of freshwater agreement. So no, there is the need to have the stability of the rule of law. And at the same time, with climate change, we see that we need to adapt the legal frameworks. So how not to balance the two aspects of adaptation of legal agreements with stability. I think that if we go, if we look at the case law of the International Court of Justice, for example, the International Court of Justice was clear that the stability does not mean that the legal frameworks cannot be adapted to new concern. So, for example, environmental concern, climate change concern can be used to interpret and apply the norms in a different frameworks. So beyond the methods of interpretation of a treaty that have to include environmental and climate change concern, we have also specific adaptation mechanism, we can call them in this way, that are, for example, the annexes, the protocols that we can have to a convention. So for example, in the case of the Sava River Basin, in the Balkan region, we have the general framework agreement on the Sava River, but then the countries decided to adopt a specific protocol on floods. There is this way to have a general agreement with the general principles that includes both quantity and quality issues, and then we can have annexes protocol to tackle specific issues related to climate change. And then, of course, we have also the mechanism of the River Basin Organization. So River Basin Organization, for example, can adopt specific standards to tackle with climate change. So I will stop here for giving the time to the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. This is a quite very significant part of the ongoing discussion, particularly how the transboundary treaties, those who have been signed already and have been functioning for some time, will they stand to the new threats of the climate change or new challenges of climate change? And those who haven't signed any agreement or in the process of signing, how they are facing difficulties because of the climate change related issues, because climate change related challenges, which are they are assuming that these things will be difficult. And I think this will be continue to keep us occupied for some time now, unless we find a formula. If these agreements or the agreements we plan for, the new agreements we plan for, whether they will withstand the climate change challenges in the long run or not. Thank you. I will now, my next question to Anders. I think I already asked you one already before in advance, but can you please tell us more about the role of the World Bank in promoting or not promoting regional cooperation at Transboundary Basin, and specifically the role of your organization in Africa?
Okay, thank you, Ashok. I think I may have touched upon some of those issues in my previous response, but overall, again, the World Bank's role is to promote development. I think it's the fact that we have the largest trust fund globally focusing on transboundary, that is focused on transboundaries, is for Africa, speaks to the importance that the World Bank associates with promoting and supporting countries coming together in both management but also development of resources. And I think the ultimate goal, as I said, it's development and poverty reduction. But what we are often trying to work towards is an investment of some type. It could be regionally owned investments, whether it's run-of-the-river hydro electric plant, or whether it's irrigation or something similar. But I think that's usually the sort of the goal and the aim that we're moving towards. You also asked about, how do we work with partners? Yes, there are different types of actors that are both supporting financially and in other ways, transboundary water cooperation and more broadly development in Africa. And the World Bank tries to cooperate with many partners. I think we have a rather strict environmental and social safeguards. We have what is called the ESF framework, we can easily collaborate with partners that have either a similar or would subscribe to ours. But if it wouldn't, if that's not on the table, we have a hard time collaborating with other funders. And I think, the World Bank at the end of the day is owned by all the countries. It's basically the world's bank, and we are guided by the board of the World Bank, and in that sense, those standards, etc., that has been established and agreed upon by the World Bank board, we are following them, and I think that's also gives a sort of stamp of credibility or quality of the different types of investments that we are advancing. They may be seen as tedious sometimes, but I think often, rather than moving forward too quickly, even though that's always the drive, it's important to look at all the different potential consequences and effects of the different types of investments. One final comment from me. I think we talked about the different agreements and whether they will stand the test of climate change. I think one way to think about it is to conceptualize the agreements not in terms of volumetric allocations, where country A gets whatever million cubic meters and country B and C and so on gets the rest or another part of that, but try to think about it more in percentage allocations of flow. But again, that is sometimes easier in theory than in practice, because then there is a need for some type of institution that would support the development of agreed upon flows and is able to actually monitor that in a way that all the countries agree to. I think and that again comes back to what we are trying to support also, the building of institutions, the development of knowledge and information that is actually agreed upon by all parties. But if that were to be the case, then this would be one potential path forward. Although countries are often, whether it's real or not, that they tend to want to have on paper, I get this specified amount rather than a volumetric allocation. So that's yet another sort of a challenge to be overcome. But there is a potential path forward here. I think not an easy one, but there is. Back to you, Ashok.
Thank you, Anders. I will not publicly push you to tell me about how the other actors and you are trying to do things in Africa. And as you all know, there are challenges, but I think I could totally understand the World Bank is representative of all the countries, and it has its own way of doing things, but also the way things are managing now, not only in Africa, in many parts of the world. The other financiers have come in a very big way, and this is a different. It's not bad or good. I'm not saying that, but I think this creates a different set of challenges. How one set of funding compared to the other set of funding, and the kind of possibilities others have now to bargain or not to bargain. But I think the other thing which is very important, you talked about this. The climate change and how the agreements should be, instead of our usual agreements have become the exact amount of water how to share, but now it's a percentage. But I think it's a very good way of doing things, but there are a couple of issues with it, because I think one will be who will measure it, what kind of organization is at place. The second thing is the time, how to allocate while your variation of the water demand and supply is changing, or because of the climate change in the basin. But I think that's the much better option what you are talking about, percentage wise calculation, rather than now this the account or amount on the basis of what kind of amount of water will be given. That has become some kind of obsolete in the climate change era. Thank you. Let's move to Hugh. Can you provide us with some examples from river basin governance issues from around the world and the best practices that emerges from solving those issues? It's good living, or you are from an island and living an island, but I think you need to understand that we are talking about the global situation now.
Yes, thank you for the question. And yes, I moved from one island, Australia, to another island, Taiwan, with the same population, but much, much smaller area. But yeah, no, we're thinking of the global in mind. While each catchment, and this is where each catchment is unique in terms of its region it sits in, the boundaries it crosses. And when you look at how to look at the governance and how to manage and what it's involved, a lot of those challenges they face are universal to some extent. So you look at responsibility for quality and management is highly fragmented. You have different national ministries, different regulators. You get this within boundaries in countries like Australia. You have irrigation, co-ops, you have environmental departments, and a myriad of roles and informal providers. And so from a management point of view, that becomes very difficult to get information. And this is where data sharing protocols between different countries at the and at the subnational level, institutional limitations, reduced transparency, slow to respond to incidents and pollution events, which is something that also comes along with that quality issue. So how do you communicate urgent events across those boundaries and respond to them, and ownership of those critical events? And we see a lot more of those under current climate change scenario. So in terms, without going into, ultra specific sort of scenarios, one interesting example I'll touch on is the Singapore. Now, Singapore traditionally has taken its water from Malaysia under agreement, and these are quite lengthy agreements, but we've seen Singapore, make tremendous investments and moves to become more self-reliant on its own water supplies, to become, I guess, a lot more independent. And in that investment has been a very, technology-heavy investment, a lot of infrastructure. There's been a lot of expertise that goes into it. So it's shown in one of those, I guess, an adaptation strategy is if you can't rely on what happens across boundaries, make sure you're dependent on yourselves. And we see this with, in the past with Hong Kong being supplied from Shenzhen with water, and looking at using alternative water sources for flushing the toilets like seawater and things like that. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of ways of dealing with these transboundary issues rather than solving transboundary issues we've seen arise in different countries. And I think they make for good case studies on looking at, manage what's within your boundaries as well as managing, working with what's outside your boundaries. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on was going back to the public health aspect and things like that. We see a lot in these transboundary catchments, a high prevalence of enteric diseases and things like that. And what a lot of people need to understand is it's pathogens themselves are a lot more of a public health issue than chemical or pesticide contamination as well. And so when you see a lot of the international policy and things that come out, they tend to focus more on the slow burn issues than these quick burn issues. And so that risk velocity is something that when you're looking at these policies and looking for good practice, is policy that understands the speed of how these events happen and how the management scenarios progress within those. And so within that, what I wanted to go back to is this key, what is good practice and what is best practice? And best practice is not universal in the sense that what is good practice for one area might not work and be good best practice for another area. So this is where I come back to the point around, I guess, the best practice is good policy that's developed through supporting evidence, through data, through research. And too often there's a disconnect between these two in the case of transboundary catchments. And so I will leave it at that, saying, you know, if we want to look for best practice, I think you need to look within look at those universal challenges, look at how they're being tackled, and look at what the evidence says about what suits best practice in a given scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. My go-to line a few years back used to be the golden principle is not to have a golden principle. I think you are absolutely right. I mean, there are many of these river basins do have the unique thing. And you are saying, I mean, the challenges. I mean, the Chinese proverb says the challenges are the opportunities. You know, this is every crisis has an opportunity. We were talking about how Singapore has developed 25 years back or 24 years back when Mahathir was retiring for the first time. He retired second time, but the first time when he was retiring, he wanted to remove from the agreement, Malaysia to remove from that agreement, which was sharing the water with Singapore. And that time I was also part of the team with the supporting Singapore's case. And the advice was those days that, find other ways not to get, of course, you will protect your agreement for the time, but find other ways how to survive without getting the raw water from Malaysia. And they took those advice and they have developed in a much bigger way now. So I think these kind of crisis, even if with an agreement, which is taking place in some of the agreements, which are like Indus or somewhere, the other members of the basin countries, given that crisis, might find another way of managing it rather than subjected with the harassment of the upstream or the powerful riparian of that area. My last question to Rosario. Given the climate change and drought has worsened the health of most of river basins around the world, what are some of the intervention approaches that could bring stakeholders on the same page and initiate urgent action? And but I think also how to bring those stakeholders to the same page, which is always, we all talk about stakeholder participation, but then I have several stories, but I'm not going to bore with you that, but please go ahead.
Thank you. And I'll be brief because we're running out of time a little bit, but I will just wrap up by just clarifying one thing. When we talk about climate, because we like to blame everything on climate, right? At least from what we know, and between Mexico and the US, 80% of the water issues that we're seeing here, it's a management issue, not a climate change issue. Even though the region is vulnerable, highly vulnerable to climate change, population growth, and all that, we need to be careful on how to communicate that climate is kind of the main driver for what we're seeing right now in the allocation issues in the basin. It's not climate. It's a management issue. It's an over-allocation issue. It's a pollution issue, mainly. Of course, climate is not an ally anymore, and it's not helping, of course, anymore. It's not going to help in the future either. But the main problem, the origin of the problem, relies more on a management issue than a climate issue, which is a good news. It means we can do something, right? It's not bad news, it's actually a good news. Secondly, local approaches. The power of locals is, I think, has been undervalued. I think we need to look more informal arrangements than actually formal agreements. I think they tend to be more successful. That's what the research has shown us on this part of the world. The more informal those arrangements are, the more no intervention of formal institutions, the better. The more attractive for locals, the more attractive for stakeholders in the ground. So we have proven that in research, at least between US and Mexico. And number three, and I believe you already mentioned, the difference between water quality and water quantity is really, really a big, huge difference. Actually, water quality brings people to the table easily than water quantity. We don't like to talk about water rights, but we do like to talk about water pollution because that's a public health concern for both countries. So, and if we add the element of environmental issues, endangered species issues, that likes people, that brings people to the table more easily than water rights. So I guess those are the very modest steps that we can take, but always try to remind ourselves that climate is not the enemy. It's not our friend, definitely, but it's not the enemy. So we need to adapt to what we are seeing and where this all started. So it's a management issue. We need to bring people creatively. And we probably need to be looking at a more local approaches instead of regional macro approaches to start and be more successful in the long run. Those are my last comments.
Thank you, Rogerio. I think unmute if you have one. I just because I think what you answered, there is a part of a question which has come now on the our chat that connect to it, and I think you have answered some of it, but I want also to see if you can answer the latter part of it. How can local communities, is the question asked by Muhammad Tahsin Islam, how can local communities, farmers and fishers be included in transboundary decisions in a meaningful way, not just consultation, especially across border? I think probably this one is coming from Bangladesh, but I think, so please answer.
I wish I knew the answer. But it's really up to we need to be creative in the way we incentivize people to participate, because sometimes not all people like to participate, either though they don't know they need to be there to actually change the conditions of the basins, but we need to provide and develop incentives for different sectors to bring them to the table, because I know there are efforts worldwide by international organizations to try to bring people in, right? All different sectors represented. And you're right. I mean, it's not just about consultation, it's about also implementation and sustainability of whatever is agreed. Because the only way that we can develop something that is sustainable is let the communities to handle it over time, because there's never going to be enough funding, there's never going to be enough international institutions or supports or networking to keep the momentum of the integration of those stakeholders. So I guess the key word here is incentives. How to incentivize these different sectors to be involved and to get and stay involved, and not just in the consultation, but also the implementation and the long-term sustainable of those efforts. And I think that's a line of research itself that we have not been able to tackle that effectively, but I think is very, very highly needed, and that's the key for the future of transboundary negotiations, definitely.
Thank you. And I mean, please, you or Mara, you want to comment, but I think I also want to ask specifically on this. does World Bank, or what kind of World Bank policy on bringing, if any kind of negotiations, bringing together the stakeholders, particularly when you are negotiating a transboundary water agreement or water organization?
So, thank you. I mean, generally, I mean, it's not that often we're engaged in actual negotiations, but let me take it from a project perspective. When we are doing or preparing a support as well as implementing a support to, say, the Okavango Northern Isle or Zambezi or any other basin, what we do require, and this is a general World Bank requirement, we require that the organization has a stakeholder engagement plan that actually, I think it goes to the question here. It doesn't only, it's not a box ticking exercise. It's actually addresses some real issues and make sure that those stakeholder engagements actually has a chance to affect the project and thereby the cooperation around the shared river system or shared groundwater system. So there is a provision within the World Bank requirements, if you will, of a project that is both established ahead of you sign off a project, but also is something that actually happens throughout. And the way that we are engaging with whoever is the recipient of a support, OCACOM, for example, or NBI or whatever, is that we follow up there's a regular follow-up and implementation support, as we call it. And one of the things that we are looking at every time we go, there are many things, but one would be particularly specifically this stakeholder engagement plan, and also to make sure that it's actually material. I mean, you can discuss whether we or the recipient of the support actually always succeed, but at least those are the sort of provisions that we are approaching it with, and we bring experts on specifically social and stakeholder engagement that we bring from our side to help perhaps an RBO that may not be as capacitated on that side. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders. There is some hand has been raised on NPAC's tech support. Can you?
That is from my side. This is just a friendly reminder that we have now exceeded the pre-scheduled time of the webinar. So it's just an encouragement to start wrapping up in case anybody has to leave.
Oh, okay. Thank you. You don't give me the time management, that then I will always mismanage it. But that's thank you for reminding it. I think I will give all the speakers a minute or two, or if you want to say something before you think that you have to say this, please go ahead. Anyone?
Yeah,
Mara, please.
Yes, I would like to say that I really enjoyed the discussion, and then of course we have focused on international water law and freshwater agreements, but it is really important from an international law perspective to have a broader understanding, for example, about human rights law. So, for example, the question about the participation of local communities, it is really linked also to human rights law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mara. I think there have been few questions there on the chart, but we don't, due to time constraint, we will not take them into account now. I hope you can communicate directly with the speakers if you want to ask these questions. But thank you all so much for being here, answering all these questions, bringing up this important issue of our time, and also reminding all the people that these are the questions which are relevant. And thank you, Carl, for giving us this platform to do this. And I think most of us, you can join the next NPAC seminar or a conference in Ottawa. Thank you, Larry. Sorry you missed your questions, but thank you all, and see you soon somewhere, sometime.
Thank you.